Hey everybody, Craig Warrack here, back with another custom action figure, and this time I bring you my werewolf. Yes, it's not a specific version of the werewolf creature, it's not from a specific comic, it's not from a specific video game, it's not even from a specific movie. This is my version of the werewolf. Not massively reimagined or redesigned, but it's still been one of my favourite figures to work on, and I think it's the best figure I've made to date. I'm a huge fan of horror movies, and the werewolf is actually my favourite movie monster, despite not having a huge amount of decent movies featuring it, to be honest. But as a kid, I was absolutely terrified of werewolves. I'll put some recommendations of movies at the end of this video in case you're interested. I even have a little collection of werewolf figures here on my shelves. I have the real Ghostbusters Wolfman figure, the Bandai model kit LBX Hunter, the Doctor Who werewolf, the Pegasus Models Fantasy Worlds werewolf resin statue, McFarlane's Fortnite Dyer figure, McFarlane's Monsters werewolf playset, and a little Lego minifigure werewolf. I know there are more werewolf figures out there, and hopefully I'll pick them up someday, but anyway, back to my custom. The werewolf stands 7 inches tall from his paws to the tips of his ears in his intended hunched over stance. I've intended him to be 1/12 scale to fit in with figures such as Marvel Legends, so even though he's larger than most of the superheroes that line my shelves, the idea is that the human character has grown bigger when they changed into the werewolf. This werewolf started out as a Marvel Legends beast figure for the most part. I altered the legs, replacing them with a combination of fodder parts to make digitigrade legs and feet from a NECA Proto Xenomorph figure. For the tail, I added a ball and socket joint from a NECA Godzilla figure's tail and attached the Proto Xenomorph's tail to that. I replaced the beast's hands with hands from a Marvel Legends Caliban, and I trimmed his nails down, and I added in new head and neck articulation using parts from NECA Godzilla's neck and tail. And from that point, it was just a whole lot of sculpting. I used 2 types of sculpting material for this custom. I used Aves Epoxy Sculpt for the head, as I find it gives a high level of detail and is easy to work with. I also used Procreate Putty, and I find Procreate a little difficult to work with. It's kind of like sculpting with bubblegum, but it has a great property that when mixed correctly, the putty is still flexible when cured. This makes it perfect to sculpt protruding parts such as the tufts of fur, the tail and ears. I don't want to just gloss over the head, as I'm quite proud of having sculpted this from scratch. I built it up slowly, focusing on getting the overall shape, then sculpted the fur and moved on to the ears. I then added in a hinge joint to make an articulated jaw and built up the teeth using toothpicks and wire as armatures to get them in the right position so they didn't get in the way of each other when the mouth opened and closed. I then went back to sculpting and covered up the articulation points and finished up the rest of the face, trying to get that really sinister expression. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I primed the figure with MIG one-shot primer, and then I painted it with Games Workshop Citadel paints, Vallejo Model Colour paints and Testors Model Master paints. I then airbrushed Vallejo matte varnish over the figure to give it a consistent finish, but used glossed finish for the eyes and mouth and nose to make them pop and look wet. A customising question I get asked often is what kind of sealer I use to prevent paint chipping. I use airbrush varnishes, but I don't really use them to stop paint chipping. They may help with that a little, but I really use them to bring the visible finish of different paints together. Sometimes I end up getting some super glue in the paint when I'm assembling a figure, and it can get that sort of shiny, glossy finish that I don't want, so I spray it with a matte varnish that will give it a matte finish. So I'm really using the varnish or the sealer to control the look and finish of the paint. To protect the paint from chipping, or what we customizers call paint rub, that comes right at the start of making a custom figure, long before you put paint anywhere near it. Paint rub is caused by surfaces rubbing against each other, so that's what us customizers need to stop by sanding down all the plastic surfaces so they don't rub. Your sealants and varnishes can help a little, but sanding down joints at the start of the customizing process is the best way to eliminate paint rub. Anyway, back to the figure. Painting the fur was just part of finishing the figure, of course, because this figure has clothes which I made using fabric. I really wanted the werewolf to be wearing clothes, although it presented a challenge in making the figure. Long-time viewers will likely know that I like the look of my figures to tell a bit of a story, and I think the werewolf having clothes is important to that. The torn clothes hopefully indicate that this isn't just a wolf-like monster, but this was once a human who violently transformed into this creature. I decided to go with a jeans and checked shirt lumberjack look for this werewolf. This is partly because I think the colours look good against the dark brown, and because this is clearly an amazing fashion choice, and no one would look like a desperate middle-aged lumbersexual hipster wearing it. It was actually one of my customising colleagues, FKN Masterpiece, on Instagram that suggested I outfit the werewolf in my own wardrobe, and it was his fabric techniques that I drew inspiration from to realise this look. If you aren't already following him, please go check out his amazing custom work. For the jeans, I got some blue cotton twill fabric, which has this really nice texture. I darkened it with an airbrush and Liquitex acrylic ink, and then used this Beacon Fabri-Tac glue to glue the fabric to the figure, carefully cutting around the articulation points. I then dry brushed different shades of blue Citadel paint onto the fabric to give it a denim look. I cut out sections to be tears in the fabric and then sculpted fur into those rips. I really didn't want the clothes in this figure to be just like an action figure with doll clothes on top of it. In general, I am not a fan of soft goods on action figures, as they look like fashion dolls rather than action figures, but I felt that if I could blur the line between the clothes and the sculpt, using paint and having the fabric and sculpt intertwined, that I could overcome this, and I'm really happy with the finished product. The shirt was a challenge because I had to find a fabric with a checked pattern tight enough to look decent at this scale. The actual checked fabric I found, well, the pattern was too large, but I eventually found this wide ribbon that I sprayed with red ink and was able to use for the shirt fabric. Again, I glued it to the figure and tattered it, highlighting and shading it with paint. I also used some thin elastic to create these suspenders so that they flex and move along with the figure. I'm really proud of how the clothes came out and how the fabric and the sculpt merged together, not limiting the articulation of the figure. So speaking of articulation, let's take a look at that. The jaw is articulated to open and close. The tongue is removable and attaches with a magnet and is flexible with poseable wire inside. The ears also have wire inside to make them slightly poseable too. The head itself is on a barbell ball joint, so rotates and tilts in every direction. The neck is also on a barbell joint, so has the same range of motion as the head, and the two joints working together give the head a good range of movement. There are butterfly hinges in the chest that let his arms swing this far back and forward. There's rotation at the shoulder and a hinge that moves this far up and down. There's rotation at the top of the bicep. A double jointed elbow lets his arms bend this far. There's rotation and a hinge at the wrist. There's a diaphragm ball joint that rotates and tilts all around. And a hinge just above the waist that lets him bend this far forward and back. But again, the combination of articulation gives him much more range. Articulation at the hips lets his legs move this far forward and back and move this far out to the side. There's rotation at the top of the thigh. Double jointed knees let his legs bend this far. He has rotation at the middle of his calf and a hinge and rotation at his ankle. In the middle of his foot, he has a barbell joint that lets his foot rotate and tilt all around. Then there is a hinge at his toes. The last bit of articulation is the tail, which is on a ball joint, letting it rotate and tilt, and it also has a wire running through it, meaning it is slightly flexible and poseable. So that's my werewolf custom action figure. I hope you like him because I think he's my favourite custom to date. I've always tried my best with every custom I've made, but this project, not being based on any specific character from comics, games or movies, made it very enjoyable, and I got to experiment with a lot of techniques. And as ever, I'm sorry, he's not for sale and I don't do commissions. I would rather you tried your hand at action figure customizing. Give it a try. I did say I was going to let you know some of my werewolf movie recommendations, and I'm going to recommend these, even though there are plenty more obvious ones, such as An American Werewolf in London, but those don't need my lame-ass help to be known. My favourite classic werewolf movie is Curse of the Werewolf from 1961. The only werewolf movie made by Hammer Studios, and it stars the incredible Oliver Reed. My favourite werewolf movie from my childhood is 1985's Silver Bullet. This is an amazing slice of the 80s with a screenplay by Stephen King. My favourite modern werewolf movie is 2014's Late Phases, Night of the Wolf. Among the glut of modern action movie biker gang werewolves, this story of a military veteran dealing with a werewolf problem in a retirement community stands out to me. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe. I won't be doing a Secret Santa project this year, but if you'd like to see hours of live streams of me making this werewolf figure, including the sculpting, the painting, the fabric work, please head over onto my IGTV on Instagram. Wherever I see you next though, pour on the power. Bye bye.